The woman already had her finger out, not raised casually but pointed straight at a teenage boy who was easily taller than her and clearly wishing he could disappear. People nearby had slowed down or stopped entirely. A mother had pulled her stroller aside, pretending to check something. Even the pigeons had shifted away like they knew something was about to happen. Camille Osei wasn't yelling. If she had been yelling, it might have blended into the usual noise of the park. Instead, she spoke in a steady, controlled voice that carried just enough for everyone around to hear every word. "You think this is funny? Standing over a little kid?" she said, her tone even but sharp. "How old are you? No, go on. Say it out loud so everyone here can hear what age someone has to be to think this is okay." The boy didn't answer. He stared at her, jaw tight. "That's what I thought," she said without raising her voice. About 40 minutes earlier, Camille had been handed a cardboard box. She had worked at that company for 4 years. 4 years of getting in early, staying late, doing extra when asked and hearing things like, "We value you," and "You're important to the team." Then on a random Tuesday in October she was called into a conference room, met 2 HR staff she had never seen before, and was handed a box with her name already written on it like everything had been decided long before she walked in. They told her she wasn't fired, just laid off. She had already started rehearsing that explanation in her head because she knew people would ask. Fired meant you did something wrong. Laid off meant the company decided it didn't need you anymore. Same result, different wording. 4 years reduced to a box and a quick handshake from a manager who couldn't meet her eyes. She left before noon. Going home didn't feel like an option. Her apartment was small, and she knew if she went inside, she'd sit down and stay there, thinking about everything she didn't want to think about. Rent was due in less than 3 weeks and she didn't have time to fall apart. So she walked instead, hands in her pockets, no real direction. She ended up in a park she had passed many times but never entered. She couldn't say why she went in that day. She just did. She heard it before she saw anything. It wasn't crying, which somehow made it worse. When she turned toward the sound, she saw 3 boys near the swings. The oldest stood out immediately. He was big, not a small child anymore, but not fully grown either, the kind of age where you know exactly what you're doing and choose to do it anyway. He held something small and blue in his hand, a stuffed rabbit. The boy he had taken it from looked about 6. He stood completely still, arms down by his sides, not trying to grab it back, not crying, just frozen. It was the kind of stillness that comes from fear, the kind that says the child has already decided not moving is safer. The older boy was mocking him, exaggerating some kind of accent while his friends laughed. The little boy didn't react. Then the stuffed rabbit was dropped onto the ground. Camille didn't think it through. She was already walking toward them. She stopped right in front of the oldest boy. "Pick it up," she said. He blinked, surprised. "Excuse me? You heard me. Pick up what you dropped." He laughed and glanced at his friends for support. "Lady, I didn't." "You're 14, maybe 15, standing over a 6-year-old and taking his toy," she said, cutting him off without raising her voice. "Do you understand how that looks? Do you realize there are adults watching you right now? Pick up." He stayed where he was. Camille nodded slowly, like she had expected that. "All right. We can take our time. I've got plenty of it today. If you want to stand here and impress your friends, go ahead. Let's see it. Because from where I'm standing, you don't look impressive. You look like someone who's about to embarrass himself." She stepped closer. He stepped back without thinking, and that small movement didn't go unnoticed by anyone. His friends stopped laughing. One of them shifted awkwardly, then quietly started walking away, trying not to make it obvious. The boy's expression changed, confidence slipping into something else, something closer to discomfort. "Go home," Camille said calmly. "All of you." This time they listened. Once they were gone, Camille turned to the smaller boy and crouched down. She picked up the stuffed rabbit and held it out to him. He looked at her for a moment, serious and quiet, then said something in Korean that she didn't understand. "You're welcome," she replied anyway, her tone softer now. He took the rabbit and hugged it tightly with both arms. Camille stood and glanced around, trying to figure out where his guardian was. A woman nearby caught her attention. She looked older, shaken, and was speaking quickly on the phone in a language Camille couldn't identify. It was obvious she was connected to the child. Camille looked back at the boy. He was still watching her. She was about to leave when a car pulled up near the park entrance. The man who stepped out moved with purpose. He was tall, well-dressed, like he had come from somewhere important and hadn't planned to be here. He went straight to the older woman first, speaking to her quickly in Korean, then turned and scanned the park until he found his son. After that, his gaze settled on Camille. He walked over, his expression controlled but tense. "My son," he began. "He's fine," Camille said before he could continue. "Some boys were bothering him. They've left." The boy spoke to his father in Korean. Something about what he said caused a small shift in the man's expression, though Camille couldn't tell what it meant. The man looked back at her. I would like to compensate you for helping him. I didn't do it for money, she said plainly. Even so, I think it would be appropriate. No, she said, firm but not rude. Your son is okay. That's enough. Have a good afternoon. She turned and walked away without waiting for a response. She didn't look back. Behind her, the boy kept watching until she was out of sight. Then he turned to his father and said one word. Again. If you made it this far, hit that like button. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Because I need to know who's here for this one. And stay with me because what happens next? Nobody in that park could have seen it coming. Part 2. Minjun said loud lady 11 times in 4 days. Jae-sung noticed without trying to. It just kept coming up in a way that made it impossible to ignore. At dinner, in the middle of eating, Minjun would suddenly say it like he was reminding himself of something important. Before bed, when the nanny was trying to settle him down, he said it again, quieter but still clear. During his English lesson, when the tutor asked him to name something that made him feel safe, Minjun went quiet for a moment, thinking seriously about the answer, and then said, loud lady. That one stayed with Jae-sung. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she came from, didn't know anything about her beyond what he had seen that day in the park. A stranger who had stepped in without hesitation, confronted a group of boys much bigger than her, and then turned down money like the offer itself bothered her. He found himself replaying that part more than anything else. Not her voice, not the scene, but the refusal. He wasn't used to that. He told himself that was why he kept thinking about her, because it stood out, because it didn't fit into the patterns he understood. He didn't question that explanation too much. On the 4th day, he told his assistant to find her. It took until midday. She wasn't difficult to locate, just not someone who left much of a trail. There was a social media account with irregular updates, an address, and a name, Camille Osei, 29 years old. Former marketing coordinator. Currently unemployed. Jae-sung read through the file once, then again more slowly, and felt something he didn't bother to name. He went to her building alone. She opened the door wearing gray sweatpants and a t-shirt that had clearly been washed too many times. The logo on it was faded enough that it was hard to tell what it had originally been. She looked at him, then briefly glanced past him as if expecting someone else, then looked back at him again. You found my address, she said. My team. You found my address, she repeated, not raising her voice, just stating it again so it settled properly. I wanted to speak with you about my son, Minju. I remember him. He hasn't stopped talking about you. Something shifted in her expression for a second, quick enough that he might have imagined it, and then it was gone. He doesn't know me. No, Jae-sung said. But he wants to. I'm prepared to offer you a formal arrangement. A paid position. You would spend time with him while he adjusts. It would be structured, professional, and you would be compensated accordingly. No. He paused, expecting her to continue, but she didn't. You haven't heard the full offer, he said. You're right, she replied. I don't need to. She held his gaze without any hesitation. Your son is going to be fine. He's a strong kid. He doesn't need a stranger. He asked for you. He's 6, she said. He'll ask for something else by Thursday. She started to close the door. Have a good afternoon. The door shut in a calm, controlled way. No anger, no force. Just final. He came back the next day. She opened the door the same way and looked at him with the same expression, like she had expected this. He got a little further into his sentence this time before she cut him off. I understand if the compensation wasn't sufficient. That number is flexible. It's not about the number. Then what is it about? She leaned lightly against the doorframe and studied him for a moment. There was nothing hostile in her expression, but there was also no interest in making this easier for him. I don't know your son and he doesn't know me, she said. You're trying to pay me to fix something that probably doesn't need fixing. Time will handle it. And I'm not in a place right now where I can take on something I'm not sure is actually good for him. Jae-sung watched her carefully. You're thinking about what's best for him. I crouched down in a park and handed him a rabbit, she said. That doesn't make me his person. He doesn't see it that way. She shook her head once. Goodbye. The door closed again. The 3rd time he brought Minjun. It wasn't planned as some kind of strategy. Minjun had been with him when the idea to try again came up, and the moment Jae-sung told the driver where they were going, Minjun's whole posture changed. He sat up straight, alert, focused in a way that made it clear this mattered to him. After that, leaving him behind didn't feel like an option. When the door opened, Minjun didn't wait. He moved past Jae-sung immediately, walking straight into the apartment without greeting her or asking permission, like he had already decided this was somewhere he was allowed to be. He went directly to the couch and sat down, settling in with complete confidence. Camille looked at the couch, then at Minjun, then back at Jae-sung. Jae-sung met her gaze and said nothing, because he honestly didn't know how to explain what had just happened. "He better not touch my remote," she said. Then she stepped aside and let them in. She made tea for herself without offering any and sat across from Minjun, holding the mug in both hands. She watched him and he watched her just as closely. Taki was in his lap, held securely. He was dressed neatly as always in a small collared shirt and pressed trousers, sitting on her worn couch like he belonged in both places at once and didn't see any contradiction in that. "Hi," she said. Minjun responded in Korean. Camille glanced at Jae-sung. "He says hello," Jae-sung translated. "He could have just said hello. He doesn't know how yet." She looked back at Minjun. "Hello," she said again, slower this time. Minjun tried. "Hello." "Close," she said, setting her mug down. "Say it again." "Hello." "Almost." "Watch my mouth." She said it again, more clearly, exaggerating the shape of the word just enough to make it easier to follow. Minjun focused on her lips, then tried again. This time it came out better. Camille pointed at him. "There you go." He smiled quickly, like the expression slipped out before he could stop it. It was there for a second and then gone, but it was genuine. Jae-sung noticed it immediately. He had been standing near the door the entire time, unsure whether to sit, watching everything closely, and that small moment landed harder than he expected. Camille didn't treat the next hour gently. When Minjun got a word wrong, she corrected him directly. "No. Again." And he tried again. There was no frustration from him, no resistance. He watched her carefully, adjusted, and tried again each time. When he got something right, she acknowledged it with a small nod and moved on. When he struggled, she slowed down, changed how she explained it, and tried a different approach without making a big deal out of it. Jae-sung watched the entire process closely. There was no clear system, no structured method he could recognize, but it worked. She paid attention, adjusted, and kept going, figuring out how Minjun learned as she went. By the end of the hour, Minjun had shifted from sitting upright to lying sideways on the couch, still holding Taki, half asleep. Jae-sung looked at him for a moment, then at Camille. She was watching Minjun in a way that was different from anything he had seen from her so far, quieter, more thoughtful, though she didn't seem aware of it. "Same time Thursday?" he asked. She picked up her mug again without looking at him. "Don't be late," she said. Something had already started to take shape in that apartment, even if none of them could explain it yet. The next time, Jae-sung would arrive earlier than necessary. And Camille would notice. The first real lesson happened on a Wednesday. Camille sat across from Minjun at her small kitchen table with a notepad and a pen, already ready to move faster than most people would expect with a 6-year-old. Minjun sat opposite her with Taki in his lap, hands folded neatly on the table like he was attending something serious instead of a casual lesson in someone's apartment. "Okay," she said. "Forget what your other teacher is doing. We're not doing that here. We're doing real English, the kind you actually use." Jae-sung had already explained the arrangement to Minjun through a translator, including the part where Camille would do things her own way. Minjun nodded, taking that seriously. "Repeat after me. I'm hungry. I hind your why. Say the whole thing together. I'm hind your why. Good. Now say it like you mean it. Say it like you haven't eaten in 6 hours and somebody needs to fix that immediately." Minjun looked at her, then down at Taki, then back up again. "I'm hungry." It was better. Clear. She wrote it down and circled it. "That's yours. Every time. You walk into a room, you're hungry, you say that. Nobody should have to guess what you need." He nodded like that sentence mattered, like she had just given him something useful he could carry around, which was exactly what she intended. They moved quickly after that, not because she rushed him but because he didn't need slowing down. Minjun wasn't the type to guess or rush through things. He waited until he understood, and once he did, he committed to it. Camille picked up on that quickly and adjusted how she taught him. She stopped giving him lists of words and started giving him situations instead. "Somebody takes something from you," she said. "What do you say?" He thought about it carefully. "Give back. Give it back. Full sentence. And look at them when you say it. Not the floor, not their hands. Their face. Try it." He lifted his eyes and looked directly at her. "Give it back. There it is." She pointed at him. "That's the one. Nobody takes you seriously if you're talking to the ground." He repeated it again without her asking, then again, each time sounding a little more certain. In return, Minjun decided he would teach her Korean, and he took that job just as seriously. She got Anyang wrong 4 times in a row, and each time he shook his head slowly like a strict teacher who had lost patience but was trying not to show it. On a 6-year-old it was almost funny, but he meant it. "Anyang," he said again clearly. "Anyong," she tried. He closed his eyes briefly. "Don't give me that face," she said. "You were saying hind your why 20 minutes ago." He opened his eyes and said nothing, which made it clear he knew he had a point. She tried again, more carefully this time. He watched her closely, then gave a small nod. She threw her pen lightly onto the table. That's all I needed. Just a nod. He almost smiled. She noticed and looked away like she hadn't. The lesson about dealing with bullies came the following Thursday. Camille didn't introduce it with a long explanation. She didn't think Minjun needed one. He understood situations better than speeches. Somebody gets in your face, she said. They're trying to scare you. What do you do? Minjun went still. It was the same stillness she had seen in the park, the kind that came from choosing not to move at all. No, she said. Her voice wasn't harsh, just firm. That's done. We're not doing that anymore. When somebody gets in your face, you look at them and you say, I'm not scared of you. He looked at her, unsure. Say it. I'm not scared of you. I'm not scared of you. Again. I'm not scared of you. One more time. Mean it. He straightened slightly in his chair, lifting his chin just a little. I'm not scared of you. Camille turned away and walked to the counter, standing there for a few seconds longer than necessary. Her eyes had shifted in a way she didn't want him to notice. She took a breath, steadied herself, and turned back around like nothing had happened. Good, she said. That's very good. At some point, Jae-sung started arriving early. At first it was 20 minutes, then 30. He told himself it was just easier with his schedule, that it made sense to be nearby rather than cutting things too close. He stayed near the doorway when he arrived, not stepping in right away, telling himself he didn't want to interrupt. From that position he saw things he hadn't expected. He saw his son laughing. Not the polite laugh Minjun used around adults, the one that sounded controlled and appropriate. This was different. Caught him off guard. Camille was doing something, telling a story or making a face, and Minjun laughed without holding back. His shoulders shook, his head dropped forward, and Taki nearly slipped out of his hands. He tried to cover his mouth like he was supposed to control it, but it didn't work. Jae-sung stood there and watched, taking in something he hadn't realized he had been missing. He didn't walk in. He waited until Minjun calmed down, then tapped lightly on the door frame like he had just arrived. The fever came on a Friday night. Jae-sung was still working when his phone rang just before midnight. The nanny sounded anxious, her voice tight. By the time she finished explaining, he was already on his way to Minjun's room. Minjun was awake, flushed, and clearly unwell. His temperature was high. Jae-sung sat down beside him, trying to keep his own movement steady. Minjun looked at him and said one word in Korean. Not Appa. He said her name, or rather the name he had made for her. The one he still used. Jae-sung picked up his phone without overthinking it. He didn't stop to consider the time or whether it was appropriate. He found her number and called. She answered almost immediately. He's sick, Jae-sung said. High fever. He's asking for you. He paused briefly. I don't know why I called. I'm on my way, she said and hung up. She arrived in 19 minutes, wearing a coat over what was clearly sleepwear. She didn't waste time with greetings or explanations. She walked straight past Jae-sung and headed down the hall, somehow finding Minjun's room without asking. She sat on the edge of the bed and placed her hand on his forehead. Minjun reached for her immediately, grabbing her other hand and holding it tightly with both of his. He didn't let go. Jae-sung stayed in the doorway watching. The apartment was large, quiet, and carefully arranged, but at that moment all of that felt irrelevant. Camille sat beside Minjun, speaking softly to him, not trying to perform or fix anything, just staying there with him. Gradually, his breathing slowed, his eyes closed, but his grip on her hand remained. She didn't pull away. Jae-sung stayed where he was longer than necessary, watching something simple that felt unexpectedly significant. At some point, Camille looked up. Their eyes met across the dim room for a few seconds. Then she looked back at Minjun and Jae-sung looked down, breaking the moment. Neither of them said anything. But something had shifted, something both of them recognized without needing to talk about it. Jae-sung didn't go back to his room that night. And Camille didn't leave. Minjun fell asleep at 9:17. Camille knew the exact time because she had been watching the clock, telling herself that once he was fully asleep, she would leave. That had been the plan the entire time. He just needed to settle properly first and then she would go home. That was the reason she stayed, and she repeated it to herself enough times that it almost sounded convincing. He was fully asleep by 9:17. She was still there at 11. She ended up in the kitchen without really deciding to go there. She had gone looking for water, opened a cabinet, then another, and eventually found what she needed. Somehow that turned into making tea, and making tea turned into something that took longer than it should have because she wasn't in any hurry to finish it. She knew that too and chose not to examine it too closely. Jae-sung walked in while the kettle was still heating. He had taken his jacket off, His sleeves rolled up in a way that suggested he had tried to get back to work and hadn't managed to focus. "Tea?" she asked. "Please." She made 2 cups without asking how he took his. It felt like the kind of place where tea didn't require customization. They stood on opposite sides of the counter. She looked toward the window, not really seeing anything outside, while he focused on his cup. For a while, neither of them said anything. "Does he do that often?" she asked eventually. "Ask for specific people when he's sick?" "No," Jae-sung said. "He's never asked for anyone like that." He paused slightly. "When he was younger, before things changed, he would ask for his mother. He stopped about a year ago." Camille didn't respond right away. "I don't know if that's progress or damage," he added. He didn't say it like a question. It sounded more like something he had been thinking about for a while and hadn't said out loud until now. "Probably both," she said. He looked at her. She was still facing the window. "You're good at that," he said. "Saying things directly." "It's not a skill," she replied. "It's just how I talk. Some people never learn how to do it." She picked up her cup. "Then they waste a lot of time." By 10:40 he asked what he had clearly been building toward. She had noticed it earlier. The way he started sentences and stopped, redirected conversations, circled around something without actually getting to it. She had been waiting to see if he would go through with it or leave it alone. He didn't leave it alone. "What did you want to do?" he asked. "Before the marketing job. Before everything else." She looked at him, slightly caught off guard. "Why?" "You mentioned you were there for 4 years, he said. "You said it like it wasn't where you meant to stay." She narrowed her eyes slightly. "I didn't say all that. You didn't have to." She let out a small breath and leaned back slightly. "I wanted to be a marine biologist when I was 9. Then I realized how much school that would take." He didn't respond. She glanced at him. He was still waiting. She looked back down at her tea. He didn't fill the silence, didn't move the conversation along, didn't make it easier for her to brush it off. He just waited like he expected a real answer and was willing to sit there until he got one. She wasn't used to that. "I wanted to do something where the work stayed," she said finally. "Not something temporary. Not something that runs for a few weeks and disappears. Something that actually sticks." "Like what?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "I didn't get far enough to figure that part out." She looked up at him. "Don't turn it into something bigger than it is. I was just walking in a park. Life just happens." "You don't believe that." "I believe it enough." He studied her for a moment. "You avoid things when they get too close. And you try to control everything when they do," she replied. "At least I make it entertaining." That almost made him smile. At some point she started noticing the apartment differently. Before, she had only paid attention to the parts that mattered for being there: the couch, the table, the space where Minjun sat during lessons. Now she saw everything else. The walls were covered in large pieces of art, clearly chosen carefully, but nothing about the space felt lived in. Everything was in place, untouched, like it existed to be seen rather than used. The dining table was large enough for 12 people, but half the chairs looked like they had never been pulled out. She thought about the nanny who didn't speak English. She thought about Minjun's clothes, always neat and formal, even when it wasn't necessary. She thought about Jae-sung standing in doorways instead of sitting down next to his son. She didn't say any of it. She rinsed her cup in the sink when she was done. He didn't stop her or tell her to leave it. She was putting on her coat when Minjun appeared in the doorway. He shouldn't have been awake. It was obvious he had woken up recently. His eyes were heavy, his movements slow, and Taki dragged slightly in his hand as he walked in. But he had made his way down the hall anyway, stopping when he saw both of them in the kitchen. In his other hand he was holding a folded piece of paper. He walked over to the table, climbed into one of the chairs and carefully unfolded it. It was a drawing, done in crayon, with the kind of focus that meant he had worked on it quietly without showing anyone. There were 3 figures. He had drawn them with attention to detail, one tall, one small, and one in between. He pointed to the tallest one. "Appa." Then to the smallest. "Me." Then he pointed to the one in the middle and looked straight at Camille. "You," he said in clear English. Camille didn't respond. She looked at the drawing, then at Minjun. She pressed her lips together and glanced up at the ceiling for a second before looking back down again, but no words came. Jae-sung had stepped closer without realizing it. He stood still watching. Minjun looked between them, completely satisfied, like he had said something obvious that just needed to be shown. He picked up Taki again, folded the paper carefully, and walked back down the hall without another word. The kitchen felt quieter after he left. Camille finished putting on her coat slowly, like she was giving herself time to get her expression back under control. "Good night," she said. Her voice was steady. Then she left. She sat in her car for a few minutes before starting it. The drawing was still on the kitchen table. Jae-sung hadn't moved it. And the next time someone found out about Camille, not everyone was going to be comfortable with it. Soyeon arrived on a Saturday. Soyeon, Minjun's mother and Jae-sung's high school sweetheart. They'd been together for years, and after a while, she decided she wanted to pursue her modeling career and left. Apparently it failed and she was back. Camille didn't hear about it from Jae-sung. She found out the way she usually found out things about his life, through Minjun. It wasn't anything he said directly. It was the way he acted. He went quieter than usual, but not in the way Camille had come to recognize as his normal quiet. This was different. More controlled. More careful. The difference was subtle, but she noticed it right away. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded, but he was holding Taki with both hands instead of one, gripping it a little tighter than usual. She didn't push him. She just took note of it. She met Soyeon 3 days later. Camille had come over for their usual Tuesday session. No one had mentioned that there would be anyone else in the apartment. When she walked in, she saw a woman standing in the living room who immediately stood out. Soyeon was tall, dressed simply in a way that clearly wasn't actually simple, the kind of understated look that only worked when everything about it was expensive and intentional. She turned when Camille entered and smiled right away, as if she had been expecting her. "You must be Camille," she said. "Jae-sung has told me so much about what you've been doing for Minjun. It's really lovely." The sentence was carefully put together. Friendly, warm, but also precise in where it placed Camille. Not as an equal. Not even as someone unexpected. Just someone doing something helpful. "Good to meet you," Camille replied. She didn't add anything else. Jae-sung was across the room. He looked at Camille, then at Soyeon, and said something about getting tea before leaving the room entirely, which made the situation more awkward than it needed to be. Soyeon didn't approach her in a direct way. Instead she asked questions. The kind that sounded casual but weren't. Where had Camille grown up? Did she have family nearby? Had she thought about what she wanted to do next, once this arrangement with Minjun eventually ended? Everything was asked gently, with interest, with a slight tilt of the head that made it seem natural. Camille answered briefly and paid attention to how each answer was received. "It's interesting," Soyeon said at one point, "how children attach themselves to people. Minjun has always been very sensitive. He just needs someone present, someone available. It's actually quite simple with children." Camille understood exactly what that meant. Present meant she had time. Available meant she didn't have anything else going on. Simple meant she wasn't essential. She smiled slightly and didn't respond. Internally she noted every word. Minjun walked into the room a few minutes later and stopped when he saw his mother. He didn't run to her. He didn't react the way people might expect. He just stood there, holding Taki, his face neutral in a way that looked practiced. Soyeon opened her arms and called his name warmly. He walked over after a moment and let her hug him, but there was no energy behind it. It felt like something he allowed rather than something he chose. His hands stayed by his sides. Camille noticed that immediately. She also noticed his face, how still it was, and something about it made her chest tighten in a way she didn't want to think too much about. She glanced at Jae-sung to see if he saw it too. He did. But he looked away quickly, shifting his attention back to Soyeon, then to Minjun again. "He just needs time," Jae-sung said quietly, not really directing it at anyone. Camille didn't respond. As the evening went on, Camille noticed something else. Jae-sung himself. He wasn't acting differently in any obvious way, which was exactly the issue. He was still controlled, still measured, still the same person she had come to expect. But around Soyeon there was something underneath that shifted slightly. Not warmth exactly. Something closer to familiarity. He finished her sentences a couple of times without thinking about it. He handed her things before she asked. Small, automatic actions that suggested a long history between them, habits that hadn't been unlearned. Camille sat with Minjun during their session and kept everything normal. She corrected him, laughed at the right moments, kept her tone steady. On the outside nothing changed. Inside she was paying attention to everything. He wasn't choosing Soyeon, not in any clear or deliberate way. He wasn't doing anything wrong. But he also hadn't drawn any clear line, and that lack of clarity said more than anything else. For Camille that mattered. She had spent most of her life being the second option, the person people chose when something else didn't work out. She recognized hesitation when she saw it, and she knew how much it could mean. She went home that night and didn't talk about it. She made dinner, watched television, and went to bed. She lay awake for a long time before finally falling asleep. A couple of days later, on Thursday, she heard something she wasn't meant to hear. She was in the hallway gathering Minjun's things, while Jae-sung and Soyeon were in the next room. She wasn't trying to listen, but their voices carried enough for certain words to reach her. Soyeon's voice was calm and certain. "You know where you belong, Jae-sung. You've always known." There was a pause after that. Not a quick one. Not the kind where someone immediately responds or shuts something down. It was long enough to mean something. Camille didn't wait to hear anything else. She picked up Minjun's bag, walked into the room and said she needed to go. She said goodbye to Minjun, gave a brief nod to Jae-sung and left without looking at Soyeon. She didn't let anything show on her face. In the elevator, she stood still and watched the numbers change, holding everything in place. She didn't let herself feel anything until she was outside. Then it all hit at once. She still showed up the next Thursday. She showed up for Minjun. But something had changed and Jae-sung hadn't realized it yet. The next time, everything would come out in a way none of them could ignore. The invitation came through Jae-sung's assistant. It was described as a private family gathering. Jae-sung mentioned it to Camille himself afterward, which made it clear he wanted her there. For a moment, she almost read into that, almost gave it more meaning than it probably had, and then she stopped herself. She had gotten better at that. She chose a deep green dress she had owned for 2 years and never worn. Fit well, it looked good and she knew it. She told herself that was enough reason. The apartment was already full when she arrived. There weren't that many people, maybe 30 in total, but the atmosphere made it feel more crowded. Everyone seemed to know each other, not just casually but in the way people do when they've shared history over a long time. Conversations overlapped easily, people greeted each other without hesitation, and Camille stood out immediately as someone who didn't belong to that pattern. She had been in rooms like this before. She knew how to move through them without drawing attention to the fact that she was an outsider. Minjun found her within minutes and stayed close to her side, which made things easier. Soyeon found her a few minutes after that. At first it stayed polite. Soyeon moved easily through the room with Jae-sung nearby, greeting people, talking, presenting a version of things that looked complete and settled. Camille watched the way people responded to her, the familiarity, the assumption that everything was as it should be. She noticed that no one questioned it and that Jae-sung didn't correct it. She kept her focus on Minjun, keeping him engaged, making sure he was comfortable. But Soyeon kept circling back. Each time it was brief. A comment, a question, something that sounded harmless on the surface but carried a second meaning underneath. Nothing direct enough to challenge openly, nothing that could easily be called out without turning the attention onto Camille instead. "You've done such a good job with him," Soyeon said at one point, smiling. "He's opened up so much. Children really just need warmth and consistency. It's a gift to be able to offer that to someone else's family." Someone else's family. Camille looked at her. "Thank you," she said. Her tone didn't invite further conversation. Soyeon smiled like she had gotten exactly the response she wanted. It shifted about 40 minutes later. The room had settled into smaller groups, conversations quieter, more contained. Camille stood near the window with Minjun beside her when Soyeon approached again, this time with 2 other women. The conversation started normally, but Camille recognized the direction almost immediately. Soyeon wasn't improvising. She had been leading toward this. "I think it's important to be honest," Soyeon said, speaking to the group but looking directly at Camille. "About what things are. Arrangements, what they involve, what they don't." She tilted her head slightly. "You understand that, don't you? You seem like a very smart woman." The tone was still polite. The meaning wasn't. The space around them grew quiet. Not completely silent, but quiet enough that people nearby were paying attention. Camille's jaw tightened. She opened her mouth to respond. Minjun stepped forward before she could say anything. He moved in front of her, small and tense, still holding Taki. He reached back and grabbed her hand tightly. He was scared, and it showed in the way he held onto her. Soyeon didn't look down at him. She didn't pause. She reached out and pushed him aside. It wasn't gentle. Minjun fell. The room went completely still. Camille dropped to the floor immediately. She checked him without thinking, her hands moving quickly over his arms, his face, making sure he was okay. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't stop. She focused on him. "I've got you," she said quietly. "You're okay. I've got you." He grabbed onto her arm with both hands. She stood up. She turned to Soyeon. Her voice didn't rise. It stayed calm, controlled, but it carried clearly through the silence in the room. "You just put your hands on a child," she said. "Your child." No one spoke. "You walked back into this room tonight and you've been playing a role for everyone here," Camille continued. "And I let you. That wasn't my business. But you just pushed a 6-year-old boy to the ground because he was in your way." Soyeon's expression didn't change, but the tension in her face was obvious. "That's not grace," Camille said. "That's not composure. That's who you actually are. And everyone here just saw it." Still no one moved. "You want to talk about being honest?" Camille went on. "Let's be honest. That boy holds my hand because he feels safe with me. Because I show up. Because I stay. You can't come back into his life and expect to step back into that role like nothing happened. You lost that a long time ago." The silence in the room felt heavier now. "I'm done here," Camille said. She picked Minjun up. He pressed his face into her shoulder and held on tightly. Before she left, she looked at Jae-sung. Just once. There was no anger in her expression. Just tiredness. The kind that comes from seeing something play out exactly the way you expected and realizing you stayed longer than you should have. Jae-sung looked at her, clearly trying to say something but nothing came out. She turned and walked out. She didn't answer his calls that night. Or the next morning. And by the time he figured out what he wanted to say, something worse had already happened. It arrived on a Monday morning. Not through the mail. A woman came to Camille's door and knocked, calm and put together in a way that suggested she was never caught unprepared. She introduced herself as Jae-sung's mother, saying it like it was something Camille already knew and just hadn't heard directly yet. She smiled when she said it. Camille let her in. She would think about that decision later and realize her guard had been down. She hadn't slept properly in days and everything already felt unsettled. At the time it just felt easier to open the door. They sat across from each other. Jae-sung's mother looked around the apartment briefly, not in an obvious way, but enough that Camille could tell she was taking everything in. Camille offered her water. She accepted it, placed it on the table and didn't drink. Minjun is a different child since he met you, she said. That's real. I want you to know I see that. Thank you, Camille replied. You've been genuinely good for him. She reached into her bag and placed an envelope on the table between them. Which is why I want to make sure you're taken care of going forward. Camille looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. Open it, Jae-sung's mother said. Please. Camille picked it up and opened it. The amount inside was significant. It wasn't just helpful, it was the kind of money that solved immediate problems. Rent, bills, the quiet stress she had been managing for weeks without saying it out loud. For a moment she just looked at it, then she set it back down. I think Minjun will be fine, his grandmother said. Her tone wasn't harsh. It was calm, like she was stating something she believed completely. He's a child. Children adjust. What he needs is stability and structure, and Jae-sung will make sure he has that. She folded her hands in her lap. You're a lovely girl, she continued. But let's be honest about what this is. You and my son can't be together. Camille met her gaze. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because someone should say it clearly, and I think you're someone who respects that. The room stayed quiet for a few seconds. Camille looked down at the envelope again. She thought about the hallway conversation she had overheard, about the silence that followed Soyeon's words. That silence had stayed with her more than anything else. She thought about all the times in her life when she had waited to see if she would be chosen, when she already had a feeling about the answer. She remembered being a child and understanding, without anyone saying it directly, that decisions could be made without you in mind. She had made a promise to herself a long time ago. She had been very clear about it. She would not stay somewhere waiting for confirmation of something she already knew. She picked up the envelope. I'll need a few days to wrap things up, she said. Professionally. Jae-sung's mother nodded, stood up, thanked her politely and left. Camille stayed at the table after the door closed. She didn't cry. She didn't move for a while. She just sat there, looking at the envelope, thinking about Minjun sitting on her couch, holding Taki, waiting for their lesson like it mattered. Eventually she got up, placed the envelope in a drawer and went to bed. She didn't call Jae-sung. She didn't try to explain. Everything went through his assistant. Clear, professional, no unnecessary conversation. She stopped coming. On the first day, Minjun sat by the door starting at 3 in the afternoon. The nanny tried to get him to move, but he stayed where he was, still in that way that meant he had already decided. She left him alone after that. When Jae-sung came home he found him there. It hit him immediately, but he pushed that aside and told Minjun she might be busy, that she would probably come another day. Minjun didn't respond. He stayed there until it was time for bed. On the second day he didn't sit by the door. He sat at the kitchen table instead. When dinner was served he ate a few bites and stopped. The nanny told Jae-sung quietly like it was something serious, and it was. Jae-sung sat across from him and asked if he was okay. Minjun looked at him, his face calm in a way that didn't match his age, and said nothing. On the third day he went looking for Jae-sung. He stood in the doorway of his office in his pajamas, holding Taki, and asked directly in Korean, "Where did she go?" Jae-sung tried to respond. He couldn't find anything that felt honest enough to say out loud. He learned about the envelope on the fourth day. It came up casually during a conversation with his assistant. A passing reference to a payment. Jae-sung stopped her mid-sentence and asked her to repeat it. She did. He sat still for a moment, then thanked her and ended the call. He stayed at his desk, processing it. He got up and went to the kitchen. The drawing was on the refrigerator. 3 figures. Labeled in careful handwriting. Appa, me. He stood there for a long time looking at it. Then he sat down at the dining table. The same table that seated 12 people and was almost always empty. He sat there alone, thinking about everything that had led to this point. He stayed there until he couldn't sit there anymore. He knew what he needed to do. But Minjun would get there first. And what he said next would change everything. Minjun came to find him on a Thursday evening. Jae-sung was at his desk with his laptop open, staring at the same document he hadn't worked on for nearly an hour. He heard small footsteps in the hallway, looked up, and saw Minjun standing in the doorway in his school clothes, Taki tucked under one arm. His expression was serious in a way that made it clear he had already decided something and was there to follow through. "Appa," he said. "Come in," Jae-sung replied in Korean. Minjun walked in and stopped in front of the desk. He didn't sit down. He didn't fidget. He just stood there looking directly at his father and took a small breath before he began. He spoke in English. It wasn't fast or smooth. He chose each word carefully, the way someone does when they're still learning but don't want to get anything wrong. It was deliberate, steady, and very clear. "She taught me," he said. "The words. How to say the things." Jae-sung didn't move. She said, "Say it like you mean it." Minjun's voice stayed firm. "I mean it." He adjusted his grip on Taki slightly. "She came when I was sick. She stayed. She didn't go home." He paused, searching for the next word, then found it. "She stayed because she wanted. Not because somebody paid." The room was quiet. "You let her go," Minjun said. Then after a second, "We let her go." He held his father's gaze without looking away. "She is my person. You bring her back." It wasn't a question. Jae-sung understood that immediately. He sat there for a moment, looking at his son, taking in everything about the situation. A 6-year-old standing in front of him, using a language he had only recently started learning, repeating words that had clearly been taught with care, and using them to say something that mattered. Jae-sung closed his laptop. "Okay," he said. Minjun didn't respond right away. He watched him for a second longer, checking, making sure it wasn't just something said in the moment. When he was satisfied, he nodded once and turned to leave. Jae-sung didn't make a phone call. He didn't send a message or ask someone else to handle it. He got in his car and drove himself. He stood outside Camille's door at 7 p.m. and knocked. When she opened it, she was in comfortable clothes, clearly not expecting anyone. Her face changed quickly, surprise, then recognition, then something more guarded, and then it settled into something neutral. She didn't open the door fully. "Jae-sung. I need to talk to you." "Hold on." She held a finger up, went back in and returned with the envelope his mother had given her. "Tell your mother I appreciate her kindness, but I don't need it." Then she crossed her arms and added, "I'm listening." He hadn't prepared what he was going to say. He had thought about it in the car and decided that anything rehearsed would come out controlled, and that was exactly what he didn't want. So he started speaking even though it wasn't smooth. "I left something unresolved that I should have handled," he said. "I knew it and I told myself it wasn't causing any real problems, which wasn't true. Soyeon was familiar, and I let that familiarity influence me when it shouldn't have." He paused briefly. "I found out what my mother did. I should have made things clear enough that it never happened. I didn't. That's on me." Camille looked at him. "That's it." "No," he took a breath. "You left and Minjun stopped eating properly. He waited by the door for a full day. I didn't know what to tell him because any explanation I gave would have meant admitting what I allowed to happen." He looked directly at her. "And I missed you. Not because of him. I missed you." She leaned slightly against the doorframe, studying him. "You let someone stand in your home and slowly undermine everything I was doing there," she said. "Over and over again. And you didn't say anything. You stood there while she made it clear where she thought I belonged, and you didn't stop it." "Yes. That's not something small." "I know." She crossed her arms loosely. "I grew up knowing what it feels like to be the person someone is still deciding about," she said. "I told myself I wouldn't put myself in that position again." She paused. "And then I did." He didn't interrupt her or try to soften it. "Why?" she asked. "Why should I open this door?" "Because Minjun stood in front of me and said it." He answered. In English. "Every word you taught him. He told me you're his person and told me to bring you back, and he meant it." He hesitated briefly. "And because I'm standing here telling you the truth as clearly as I can, even if I'm not good at it yet. And I'm not leaving until I've said everything I need to say." "Are you here because Minjun asked you to be?" she asked. "No. I'm here because I want to be here. Because I need you," he replied without missing a beat. Camille looked at him for a long moment. She glanced down, thinking, then back up at him again. After a few seconds, she stepped aside and opened the door fully. Across the city, Minjun was sitting on his bed with Taki, waiting. He didn't know what his father would say or how the conversation would go, but he was waiting anyway. And in the apartment, the drawing was still on the refrigerator, exactly where it had been left, with 3 figures standing side by side. It was a Tuesday again. They were at a different park, but it looked the same in the way October usually does. The air felt familiar, the light was the same, and everything had that steady, in-between feeling. Minjun was a little older now. Not in a way that stood out immediately, but enough that you noticed if you paid attention. His coat was new, his legs were longer when he sat, and his voice had changed just slightly from the careful tone he used the first time he tried to say hello at Camille's kitchen table. He was standing near the water fountain watching 3 boys. Camille noticed it from where she was sitting. She had a cup of coffee in her hand and had been on the bench for a while, not doing anything in particular. She had gotten used to having time like this, time where she could sit somewhere in the middle of the day without rushing off to something else. It wasn't perfect, but it was something she had built for herself, slowly and in her own way. She saw Minjun stop walking. She saw the stillness right away. Then she followed his line of sight and understood. A smaller kid stood near the fence by the fountain, clearly uncomfortable. 2 older boys were in front of him, one of them talking, using that slightly exaggerated posture that meant he was showing off for his friend. The smaller kid kept looking down. Minjun stayed where he was for a moment. Camille didn't move. She didn't call out to him. She just watched. He walked over. He didn't rush, didn't hesitate either. He crossed the path at a steady pace and stopped next to the smaller boy. He didn't ask what was going on. He didn't make a big entrance. He just stood there quietly until the older boy noticed him. When the boy finally looked at him, Minjun spoke. Camille couldn't hear the exact words from where she sat, but she didn't need to. She recognized the rhythm of it, the structure, the way he held himself. She had taught him those sentences. She had made him repeat them until they felt natural. His voice didn't shake. The older boy responded, still trying to hold on to whatever confidence he had left. Minjun said something else, short and direct. That was enough. The other boy glanced at his friend, who had already started to lose interest, and then they both walked away. Minjun turned to the smaller kid, said something quietly, and the kid nodded. Then Minjun came back to the bench. He sat down next to Camille. Taki was tucked under his arm like always, but the way he held it had changed. It wasn't tight anymore. It was just there, something familiar he didn't have to think about. Camille kept looking ahead. She waited a few seconds before saying anything. "Who taught you that?" she asked. Her face stayed completely straight. Minjun turned to look at her. He knew her expressions well enough by now to recognize when she was holding something back. He knew when she was serious and when she was pretending not to be. He leaned back slightly and looked out at the park. "My person," he said in clear English. Camille pressed her lips together and gave a small nod. She looked toward the fountain again and didn't say anything right away. Jae-sung was sitting on a bench across the path. He had been there the entire time, holding his phone like he was reading something important, even though he hadn't actually focused on it once. He had been watching instead. He saw Minjun walk over to the other kids. He saw the way he stood, the way he spoke, the way he didn't back down. He also saw Camille stay where she was, letting him handle it on his own, trusting him to do what he had learned. He felt something settle in his chest, something he didn't try to explain or define. He thought about a different Tuesday months ago, one he hadn't been part of. A meeting that had gone too long, a decision to send a driver instead of going himself. He thought about how easily that day could have gone differently if Camille had chosen a different route or not gone into that park at all. He thought about the drawing still on the refrigerator. It hadn't been moved. No one had suggested it should be. It had stayed there through everything, through the awkward moments, the arguments, the adjustments, the quiet improvements. 3 figures drawn in crayon, slightly uneven but completely certain. Camille glanced over at him. "He still can't say refrigerator properly." Jae-sung looked up. "Neither can you." "I say it fine. You say refrigerator. There's no D." "There is absolutely a D." "There isn't." Minjun looked at both of them with a calm, slightly unimpressed expression he had developed over time. "Both of you are wrong," he said very seriously. Camille turned to him. "What did you just say?" "I said both of you." "I heard you." She pointed at him. "Where did you get that kind of confidence?" Minjun didn't answer. He didn't need to. Things weren't perfect. Jae-sung still had work that pulled him away at inconvenient times. Camille still had moments where she deflected with humor instead of saying what she meant. There were days when everything felt slightly off, when communication didn't come easily, when people got tired and small things turned into bigger ones. But what they had now was real. The bench they were sitting on was real. The coffee in Camille's hand was real. Minjun sitting between them, holding Taki, speaking clearly in a language he had learned piece by piece, was real. The connection between them wasn't something planned or arranged. It had come together through choices, mistakes, corrections, and moments that could have gone differently but didn't. Minjun leaned back against the bench, relaxed. "Good day," he said. Camille looked at him and nodded. "Yeah," she said. "It is." Jae-sung put his phone away and looked at both of them. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Around them, the park carried on like usual. People walked past, conversations continued, a dog barked somewhere in the distance and then stopped. And on that bench, on a regular Tuesday, they stayed exactly where they were. The end. My dear viewers, if this story resonated with you, do hit the like button and subscribe. Also tell us what your favorite parts of this story was. We love to hear from you.